Welcome everybody to the NYU Silver Alumni Panel Series, and tonight's panel is on social justice and social work practice. My name is Judy Rosen. I'm a second-year MSW student here, and we have a very interesting panel here this evening. We have Kate Barrow, Casey Burke, Diana Stewart, Sarah Tarshis, and Kingsley Rowe here. And they're all working at different agencies, doing different things within the field of social justice. So we all know that the social work field is varied, and you're about to find out how varied the social justice field is as well. So it should be an interesting evening. Our panelists will begin by each speaking a little bit about their agency and the work they do. I'll have some follow-up questions for them, and then we'll open up the floor for your questions. So start thinking about what questions you might want to ask later on. So. Welcome. Thank you for coming here tonight. And I guess we can begin with Casey. 5 minutes.
Hello. My name is Casey Burke. I graduated from here in 2005 and since have worked, it ends up primarily with people living on the street. I've worked for a public hospital in the HIV outpatient unit, and then for several different housing agencies doing supportive housing work. And I'm currently the clinical coordinator for the Common Ground Street to Home project in Brooklyn. We do street outreach 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, looking for people on the street, getting them into permanent housing, be it like independent housing or supportive housing, but making sure that we're able to serve them better than the previous shelter systems and homeless service systems have. Very successful, really just constant movement in good directions.
I'm Diana Stewart, and I graduated here in 1974, and it sounds such a long time ago. But I'm glad to be here with colleagues, more current colleagues. I have background in clinical social work training, but also when I was a student here at NYU, they had a CO department. And I was the one who took all the electives in CO, and I had a wonderful professor named Sherman Barr, who was a kind of mentor to me. So I came expecting to be a clinical social worker, and I found that I became really much more connected to both community organization and the clinical area, because I had come here directly from California, Southern California, where I was a VISTA volunteer, which is today called AmeriCorps. Is anybody here an AmeriCorps alumni? Ah, yay, yay. And I'm sure you're involved with OWS then. I became involved with OWS. I had participated in some training programs through OWS last spring, and I found it to be a tremendously social work experience. I thought, this is really wonderful. And it empowers people to go home to their communities and organize around whatever needs to be done. So I have a background primarily in mental health, aging services, and currently I've been doing a lot of pro bono work, it's not just lawyers, in immigration rights. And one of my articles is in the Independent there, and I hope you have a chance to take a look at that. And so I want to talk, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to talk about how volunteering can also empower you, and how the personal is the political. That's very important for me. So that you may be working in an agency which does not identify itself as a community organizing advocacy for social change, but you can, through the work that you do individually with your clients, identify, through the micro work, you can identify macro issues, and then you can organize with your colleagues to address these, and that has been my experience. So we'll talk about that as we go on.
My name is Kingsley Rowe, and I graduated in '06. And my background is in is varied, but mostly with disenfranchised populations like the homeless, gay youth, working in supportive housing. I currently work for CASES, which is the Center for Alternative Sentencing and Employment Services, working with people who are formerly incarcerated. I work in a program in which people are sentenced to 3 days community service plus cognitive behavioral groups, as well as individuals meetings, which focus on the issues that bring people back and forth to jail: drugs, homelessness, joblessness. And I get I get a lift, and I have a passion for it. My experience is a little different than in social work. I'm formerly incarcerated, so issues of incarceration are extremely important to me, and I think is a population that is overlooked a lot among the disenfranchised populations. Considering the mass incarcerations of the 80s and the 90s, and given that some of these individuals are on their way back home, that they would have a significant coordinating service to make sure these individuals can acclimate themselves back into society, be able to be productive citizens. But a lot of agencies, well, there's not a whole lot of agencies out there doing the work. There's a few, but much more needed than what's currently out there. During my time at NYU as what should Diana said, I wanted to be what you call a clinical social worker. But what I really learned is that any interaction that you have with someone is a clinical interaction, and is all of the way you use that interaction with individuals. And so sometimes this population is somewhat difficult to work with, but is a population that needs the help, but also has a great deal to offer. When people say someone's incarcerated, incarceration means like any one of you can be incarcerated. You can be sitting next to someone. You can be living your next door neighbor. The people you catch the train with. Some of these people have experienced incarceration, so it's something that is around us, and it's becoming much more of an issue when it comes to progressive social work practices and initiatives in order to reach that population. And if you have more questions, I guess I can answer those at that time.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Tarshis. I graduated from NYU in 2009. And like many students, I went into the School of Social Work thinking I would do clinical work and to open up my private practice one day. And lo and behold, 2 years later, I felt very differently. And in 2009, I actually met Kate Barrow and did some organizing work with her and got involved in more social justice-oriented work. And I actually graduated in the height of the recession, and being an immigrant, I'm from Canada, it was increasingly difficult to find a job, and I applied to many different places, and I landed a job working for a workforce development program helping women, poor women of color, find jobs in New York City, and that's what I've been doing for the last 2.5, 3 years. I work for Sanctuary for Families. We're the largest domestic violence agency in the state, and we work with over 10,000 clients in a given year. And I work exclusively with the Economic Empowerment Program, which has been extremely exciting because I'm part of the clinical department. So I work with social workers, we work with the legal department as well, but we are doing social work with a clinical lens, doing workforce development at the same time. So having these two worlds collide has been really interesting. And we've developed our own in-house training, service sector skill building. We do office operations, IT training, and lots of really exciting stuff that we've been a part of over the last couple of years. So far, we're the first agency in the state to be able to do something like this exclusively for domestic violence survivors. So it's been very exciting for us. And I think another piece that's been important to me is that my department adopts an anti-oppressive lens in the work that we do. We believe in treating all of our clients equal, and we believe in a living wage. So we're not looking to give our clients jobs making $7.25 an hour, making minimum wage, and we're really about career development and planning, long-term viable career tracks. So that's what we've been doing, and so far outcomes have been good. Clients are getting good jobs. So that's been basically what I've been doing the last little while.
Hi, I'm Kate Barrow. The social worker in me feels like we should be in a circle right now. I don't know about this. And I think I was probably, or on this panel, I think I'm an anomaly in that I came to NYU wishing that there was a CO track and actually coming for clinical skills in order to do bigger picture work. I had a background in nonprofit management, working with young women 13 to 17 who were living in a therapeutic group home due to mental illness that they had, as well as typically a lot of trauma and sexual violence that they'd experienced at early ages. And so having that kind of background, I really wanted to get the social work skills on a systems level, but I knew that I also needed to understand the individual, because everything is clinical, as you said. And since graduating, I have continued to work predominantly with young people. They are my love and my passion. I think they're brilliant and fascinating and often really ignored overall. I think it's really important that we create spaces for them. And I also had the privilege of working with court-involved youth, which I've been doing for about 3 years now with the Center for Court Innovation. I spent 2 years at Midtown Community Court doing work very similar to what Kingsley was talking about.
I love that organization, by the way.
Well, we'll talk about it. We get to do some good work, and also, I was actually at a meeting this morning with some cases folks.
Okay.
So also love cases.
Yes.
But so I was doing a lot of group programming for young people arrested on lower level misdemeanors, nonviolent crimes, things like that, short-term counseling, community service, doing some job development, programming for court-involved youth, and then also through funding changes, which as many of you will discover, really dictates the work that we do at different points. My position shifted into being more of a clinical social worker. And at that point, I was coordinating all of the queer sex worker programming at Midtown Community Court. So I was doing curriculum development and also group facilitation for LGBT folks who'd been arrested for prostitution. And then also doing a lot of alternative to incarceration with long-term drug treatment clients, and just about everything else you can imagine at a community-based court. And then in the last year, I became, still at CCI, the Center for Court Innovation, the project director for a pilot project called Bronx Futures. We work in Bronx Family Court with young people who have what's called juvenile delinquency charges. So these are lower level charges that would be considered a crime if they were over the age of 16 at the point of arrest in New York State. And the young people that we serve are all folks who have some kind of mental health concern. So what we do is a combination of assessment, of kind of light supportive counseling, and then linkages to community-based services, because the idea is that young people, kind of speaking to the reentry piece, young people are always going to be coming back to their communities. Whether they're locked up for a short time, whether they're locked up for a long time, they're coming home. And so they should be receiving services in their home communities, whether it's near school, whether it's near home. We shouldn't be setting everything up just through the court system. So we do a lot in that way. We like to do a lot of what I call soft advocacy. We're not technically an advocacy organization, but that doesn't mean we can't frame things about our clients' needs in a way that might be most beneficial to them. And we also do a lot of cross-systems training and systems change work. So that means training judges, the law department, which is the prosecuting body in family court, legal aid, different folks, the mental health treatment providers, because sometimes they'll say we don't work with court-involved kids, we don't treat violent young people, or we don't have security to work with them. And say, well, sitting in a tiny office with them, and they're really funny and like really interesting, and I think that we should set this up. So we try to do a lot of systems change work as well. And the one other tiny piece is I also, for the last about 4 years, and how I met Sarah, have been involved in community organizing outside of work through a basically grassroots collective called Rise, where we do a lot of educational organizing and work around social work education in particular. So that was probably more than 5 minutes.
So some of you came to NYU expecting to do some community organizing or wanting to, or as you both had said, or social justice. Some of you did not. Some of you came here for the clinical stuff. And what I'm interested in is what changed your mind? Was there any experience here at the school that made you shift? Any experience in the field or in what you were learning that opened you up, that, as we said in the 70s, raised your consciousness?
Yeah, well, I remember we had something called the POPs piece. Do you still have that?
Yeah, we still do.
And that was my first year. And I wound up going to East Harlem to a senior citizen center, and this was, I said in the 70s, right? Sort of a different city then. And I remember when I got out of the subway, after work, after I was in my field placement there, I was on my way home. I couldn't find the subway, and I asked this little kid, "Where's the subway?" And he said, "That'll be 25 cents." So this was, my God, I gave it to him. I mean, today it's probably gone up, but we in the senior center, while I was working in the senior center, outside the seniors were being mugged right outside the door. And in the POPs piece, I did a needs assessment questionnaire. The staff, funny thing that I found out through it was that you're always getting surprises in your work. I thought we'd have to translate it into Spanish. We did not translate it into Spanish. None of the staff could actually read Spanish anyway. They were fluent in Spanish. And the seniors themselves were mostly not literate in Spanish. And they were in a literacy class at the center, which they graduated from. It was very exciting, for Spanish. So there were all kinds of interesting things that I learned from that experience. And it, of course, connected me back again to my Southern California Vista experience. And the other thing that when I was in school, I had the opportunity to do an independent study. And I had lived in Japan for several years and worked there teaching English and working in a hospital in Fukushima, the area, which is now, can't go back to Fukushima because of the radioactivity, which is really sad. But anyway, I wanted to connect my social work practice to my experience having lived in Japan. And so I had the opportunity through an independent study. And what I did was I went up to the Buddhist church on Riverside Drive. Does anybody know where that is? The Buddhist, still there. And I offered my services to teach an ESL class because I also know how to teach ESL. And what my plan was to establish relationships through teaching ESL and then evolve it into a conversation class in Japanese half of the time to talk about problems that people in the group had had. And then I wrote this all up as my independent study. And I think that opportunity that I got here was really important because it's about how you use all of your totality of your experience. And then years later, I would be visiting somebody in detention whose only reason for being in detention was that he, at the airport, admitted that he didn't want to go back to the country he was from, and therefore he was put in chains and taken off to Elizabeth Detention Center, where I met him, and then he was later transferred to the Essex County Correctional Facility, and they use all the same language that they would use in the criminal justice system. And I had to organize 26 agencies and work with Congressman Donald Payne in New Jersey, who's since deceased, but he helped get him paroled. He is now married and expecting a baby and still fighting to stay in this country. We won't go through all the details, but the point is that my experience living in another culture, myself, has informed a lot of, I just can't imagine, you can't imagine how your early life experience is ultimately going to play out in a bigger role. If you're open to it, it's like being open to the universe, and people will help you. It's amazing, the people that will help you.
Sarah, you mentioned that also, that you came here wanting to do clinical work. Was there some moment in class that a light bulb went off, or was it evolving for you? Or?
I think it evolved. I mean, in terms of making that shift to more sort of social justice-oriented work, I think after 2 years of NYU and really thinking, I guess on a personal level, thinking about my place in this work, and it's interesting, we talked about this yesterday in a diversity class. There are 40,000 nonprofits in the city, and I started to think about my place in the nonprofit, and most of them are run, by white social workers, and I identify as a white social worker coming from a place of privilege. And understanding that I have a certain advantage in society, and really sort of thinking more about what that means, and the fact that structurally speaking, so many of us that do this work that are white are really sort of capitalizing off of folks' misery, essentially, because we are working with poor population. I think when that reality sort of surfaced for me, I sort of took off the glasses and really thought about what I'm doing and my role, and how can I do this work in a way that I hope can be genuine. I hope I can help people and acknowledge my place. And then the more I started to explore these conversations and getting in touch with other students and other organizers and thinking about the work that I do, I think that's when this sort of surfaced for me. And it's been a guiding principle in the work that I do. It's something that I work with my clients around a place of power and privilege, and that difference, and how I can be an effective agent for change, because our clients are facing so much institutionally, layers and layers of oppression, racism stemming from generations and generations. So that's for me, I think, when all this came together in terms of sort of the social justice work and really adopting a lens that's anti-oppressive. And that happened right upon graduation, for me, especially after the years of work that I did. And
I was wondering if we could get like what a typical day would be. Maybe Kingsley, you could start and tell us what a typical day is like for you. Someone can close the door. Awesome.
So a typical day is usually come into my office, and we have clients that have already been mandated to come to the program. They show up in the morning, and they give them breakfast and things of that nature. And we talk with them, trying to enlighten them on what the program is about, what kind of services you can receive, and how it's important that not only we give you the information, but that you do something with it. They proceed to go downstairs and do community service for about 3 hours. They come back, and we do individual sessions trying to assess them for their needs. Me and my colleague, we run cognitive behavior groups during the day, and work with them on the issues of around their thinking. So they say that recidivism is to address this primarily on thinking and being able to reflect upon your thinking and make better decisions. So we concentrate on making better decisions, concentrating on some of the blocks that people have in their thinking as a way, for instance, a lot of guys I have say, white, I don't believe white people can help me, and I don't trust them, and a lot of I guess a lot of their views may be valid based on their experience, but encouraging them to develop a new paradigm of thinking as that your help can come from anywhere. As I explained to them, and I use a lot of my own experience. When I was incarcerated and being incarcerated, it can be very difficult in trying to reach out to people and wanting to reach out to people. And I had this individual who happens to be white. When I was in the dungeon, he was he put his hand down and said, if you would like to improve yourself, if you would like to do things you're talking about, let me give you a hand up. And so I encourage them that you never know where your help comes from, and that your help can come from anywhere. And so at the end of the day, they get to go home, and they come back the next day and for 3 days. But most of the guys, a lot of the guys that I have, I keep in touch with them after the program, even though it's not my responsibility to do so. But many of the individuals that come into the program are. There's a lot of suffering out there, and I don't know if a lot of people see it. And a lot of the guys, especially joblessness, problems finding jobs, and I understand what I'm sorry, your name? Kate. Kate talked about livable wage, and so they may say, well, I just had this conversation with a client yesterday. I don't want to work at McDonald's, and he says I would be better off hustling if I work at McDonald's, because he says it's not a livable wage, and I don't blame you. It's if you want to provide for a family and you're trying to establish yourself, how can you support a family working at McDonald's? It's sort of impossible. It's very difficult to do it. So we talked to them around building skills, referring to programs that can help them build skills, and like I said, skills that's going to allow them to get jobs that pay a livable wage. Just like many of the people here, people want to be paid a livable wage. It's very important. So that's typically what my day consists of.
And it's interesting that it's a good example of how the wider world really affects us and how important policy is, and livable wage, maybe minimum wage should go up, and
Sure.
this is a good example. And actually, it was going to be my next question, actually, of Casey, because you briefly mentioned it, I think. But there have been changes in how New York City helps or doesn't help their homeless population. And you had mentioned that you had to make some adjustments along those lines. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your agency relates to the city, how it works with the city, and how that has affected you, and how you are able to adapt to that.
So the program that I work for, we're sponsored, I guess, by an organization called Common Ground. And Common Ground is before 2007, was just a building management agency. They own a whole bunch of buildings that are kind of mixed use. They have people with HIV and people with mental illness, and also just people with low incomes, like making below like $30,000 a year who win the lottery, you get to live there. Nice places, beautiful places with like great amenities, and the buildings that they've built in the past few years are all green buildings with these really just interesting construction, and a place anybody would want to live. But in 2007, the city changed the way that they were doing homeless services for people that were street homeless. Before, there were just 1,000 different agencies doing like kind of spotty services, passing out sandwiches and clothing, and just talking to people and making sure, thankfully, that they weren't freezing to death or all the horrible things that happened due to the weather. But it was not, the continuity of services was not there. Everybody was being served by like 5 different places, and no one was really able to connect, do anything for them. And even in order to get housing, people had to, most likely had to be in the shelter. You had to be in the shelter for 6 months. And while you were in the shelter, you had to engage in psych services. If you had a psychiatric problem, you had to engage in substance abuse services. They wanted you to be looking for work. All of these things that are somewhat impossible when you're living in a shelter. You don't have the stability that you need to maintain sobriety or to maintain your mental health stability. And so it was just wildly unsuccessful. And so in 2007, they did this big restructuring, and all of Manhattan is run by Goddard Riverside, and they contract out to several different other agencies, but the city is divided into catchment areas for them. And then my group does all of Brooklyn and all of Queens, and then there's a group that does Staten Island. I think it's Project Hospitality. And then Bronx Works does the Bronx, and we are on the street 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're in charge of identifying every chronically homeless person in our borough. And chronic homelessness means you've been on the street, not in shelter for more than a month, been on the street for 9 months or more out of the last 2 years. You can verify that with like a neighbor or a friend who knows you to be street homeless, and we have to see you on the street. So we do that, we find people, we bring them inside, we have stabilization beds at some of the YMCAs and the YWCAs and some various like SRO hotels all over. And from there, we try to get you into housing directly. We do not require sobriety, we do not require compliance with anything. We work with everybody. We work with people with prison records. We have some people who are on the sex offender registry. We have people who are undocumented immigrants, and sadly, we can't do a lot for them, but we do as much as we can. We have women running from domestic violence situations. We have children, which so sad. And we can't really work with them, but we find places for them, and I've connected with a bunch of different agencies. I've been with Common Ground since 2007. I worked first as a part-time worker, and then I moved into being the supervisor for the overnight shift, which I do not recommend. The 12 to 8, it's a nightmare, but so much wonderful stuff happened overnight. And then I moved into the office as the clinical coordinator. So I have a staff of 6, they're case managers, and we do everything for these people. We find them on the street, we move them inside, we get them benefits, we get them ID, because so many of our people, it seems very simplistic to think that these people, some of them are homeless because they have no ID. But yeah, sure. But we help people to establish themselves, and things that I know I've taken for granted, things like having a birth certificate or having a social security card, those things keep people from moving forward. And it's nothing that you understand until you've seen it. Like I had a guy, he was essentially homeless because he lost his driver's license, and he's an immigrant from the Middle East. He was an asylee, he lost his green card, he lost everything, and ended up living on the street. And it just, your life kind of just spirals out of control from there. And so, we've been really surprisingly successful at getting people in and working with them from point A to point Z, I guess, or point F or whatever. Getting them.
Can I ask you a question? See, all of the things that you're talking about are the micro area where you're doing important work for clients individually. But I bet all of you, as well as you, can see that there are certain policy issues that are creating this need for systemic change. And this is where, as social justice advocates, we have to move above the intense, tiring, exhausting day-to-day work on behalf of clients in a rotten system, to figure out and work together in our collectives, in our coalitions, to try to change these laws. Is there some way we can focus our discussion on how we work to change this? One thing that I've discovered is it's very important to show up at public hearings, to provide testimony. One thing that I was shocked at when I was asked to speak at a hearing on detention, immigrants in detention at the city council, was how little our elected officials knew about detention of immigrants. And so our role was really, we had to educate them because we want them to change the laws. And we can't get them to change the laws if we don't do something, put our necks out to educate them.
Well, I think, we have the opportunity, all of us, in different ways to contribute. And one of the things that interested me was that Kate was talking about how you work at the agency, but you're also doing some volunteer work as well. And what I wanted to ask you was, is that hard for you? Does it stress you out doing that, or does one kind of feed the other and give you a holistic feeling of being able to help in two different ways?
I think it's all a yes and to me, because I find, I hear what Diana and Casey are both saying, and I feel like if we don't have people working on every level, then change doesn't happen. And the horror stories I hear from some of my clients about like individual social workers they've interacted with, I'm so grateful when I hear people doing that individual work with, coming from like a really heartfelt kind of social justice perspective, because that's so important, just like it's so important to be doing that big picture piece. And I definitely have found for myself that a lot of it is about community building. So really having a community of folks, whether they are at my agency where I found like-minded people who have similar values that I can really talk kind of in a more transparent, off-record way about things that we're seeing or patterns that are coming up or ways that we want to push our agency towards a more anti-oppressive perspective, because that's certainly not language that's used on record as much as I wish that it was. And so for me, like grassroots organizing and things like that I do outside really feed that. And that's a place where I can go and, in community really push myself farther and my analysis farther and my practice farther, because it's not just about having an intellectual understanding of systemic oppression, even though that's really, really important. But I've also seen people who can talk like amazing about systems and how racism is playing out and this and that, and then at the same time like enact some pretty egregious like microaggressions towards somebody sitting next to them, and just like cut somebody off, take up space in a way that's just really problematic and have no self-awareness around it. And so I feel like that's why the community piece is so important, because it's like if I can write a paper about how systems theory works or how social justice is coming out, like that's really not as useful as if when I'm sitting in the room with somebody and I have a client who's like a young man of color who's like, "Miss, you're a white lady, you can't help me." If I can't hold that tension with them in that moment and reflect their reality in some way and really honor that and say like, "I'm really sorry that your experience so far has been that like you can't trust me," and I totally honor that, and like we can take as long as you want, like getting to know each other, and if you never feel comfortable, that's fine too. And I practice that in community. That's because I think that that's the space where we learn how to hold those difficult moments and when things arise. And the same whether it's that with an individual client or in a staff meeting, when somebody says something I'm like, "Oh God, what am I going to say right now?" I can't believe that just fell out of their mouth. So to me it is like those many levels. And so hopefully it does for me, I feel like it feeds everything. And also there are certain points where like recently with like a lot of staffing changes at my agency and taking on extra responsibility, I'm like, I have to step back from some of the things I usually do. So it is figuring out how to do this work in a way that feels sustainable, I think, because none of us are going to be any good to anyone if we're completely burnt out. And that's part of how capitalism works, is it just like, we just feed the machine in some ways, it like takes everything we have, and so we have to figure out how to sustain ourselves and our work and each other.
Okay, I want to take a quick audience poll. How many of you are first years? Anyone? It's okay. So I phrase that question a little differently, but all right, it's intercession, it's summer break between the 2 years, or it's the summer after graduation. What can you do with that time if you're a student to either get involved with social justice or to prepare yourself better for field, prepare yourself for the field? What would you, looking back, maybe have wanted to do between that time? What would have prepared you?
I mean, I don't think that I ever did anything to prepare me because I was just trying to survive.
Or what would you recommend?
I mean,
they get into
I think that
volunteering?
understanding everything about problems that you're interested in, or populations that you think you might be well suited to work with, reading lots of books, talking to people, especially I work with the homeless. I totally recommend walking up to a homeless person and just having a conversation with them, because you will learn something. It will change your perspective on the problem and all the things that we face in fixing that problem. So I think immersion is like the best thing you can do.
Anyone else? Any suggestion?
I mean, I worked at a crab shack in rural Maryland and saved up as much money as I could waitressing that summer, but because that was what was able to like then sustain me for the rest of the year, to be able to like enter into this program for my second year and do everything that I wanted to do, was being able to have like saved up, because finances are very real too, I think, for folks. But yeah, definitely I think jumping in and volunteering and things like that are good. But
Are you continuing your education? And if so, what ways do you do any continuing education?
I read a lot of books. And I've always been such that if I hear something that interests me, or if I read about something that, like part of an article or part of a book that interests me, I will go and find other information about that. And my social work track is entirely not what I thought it would be. I started school, I wanted to work in a hospital, I wanted to work in an HIV program, and I did that for about 9 months, and I became really interested in working with people who were homeless and living in supported housing, and so I did that for a little while, and then I randomly just took this turn and ended up working with homeless outreach because I needed a second job because I'm a social worker. And it just totally changed my perspective, and I really see myself staying here and kind of moving up, and I'm very passionate about it on every level, and I do understand the problem from a way that a lot of people can't, because I've like fully immersed myself in it. And so I feel like that for me has been really successful, and just like something piques your interest and you go that way. You just kind of take it where it leads you, and I think it can make you very fulfilled, and it can help you to be where you need to be.
Are there any professional organizations, or Diana, you had mentioned something you wanted to talk about volunteering with a certain organization that might be good for people to be involved
Well,
in?
I just think you should get on the listserv for the Radical Social Work Network.
How do they do that?
Radical social.
Well, if you want, you can send me an email.
I like
I'll
that.
hook you up with it. It's a great opportunity to be with like-minded social workers who are really concerned about the bigger issues, about the micro and the macro. And even in the micro, there are some people who just are working to just, unfortunately, help people adjust to a bad situation, whereas the Radical Social Work Network is focusing on a bigger issue, on empowering people to make changes to overcome it and to work together. And for example, older tenants in a building not being charged for their washing machine use, and being charged all kinds of vacuous, mysterious charges. And instead of just doing one by one, there's the Washington Heights Coalition on Housing works with people to hold the rent money for everybody. And now they're powerful because they've all brought their individual issues together. and suddenly the landlord's willing to negotiate. So the Radical Social Work Network, my email is dstewartlmsw@gmail.com. Anybody wants to get on that, I will hook you up.
I also think, as far as learning more about social justice, I think one of the most powerful movements in the last year was OWS. Yeah. And I spent a lot of time with them in Zuccotti Park. You know, I couldn't like stay overnight or anything, but I talked to a lot of people down there, and I didn't really know how important social justice was to a lot of people. I mean, you know, you have people from all walks of life down there. And it just shows you the yearning that people that are feeling, that somehow things are kind of screwed against them, or kind of construed against them, like as we say the playing field is not level. Mm-hmm. And so I learned a lot about a social worker in terms of how to help people in the moment and what I can do concretely to be assistance to people. But I think that, I mean, if you want to choose to be involved and volunteer with a group of people, I would definitely check out OWS. I think they're doing some very powerful things, and even though they've been somewhat silenced or somewhat badgered, or people say they're not powerful as it was, I think it's much more powerful than people give it credit for, and you can learn a great deal about people and their life experiences just by hanging around them, because social work is about addressing the experiences of people, addressing their individual experiences, and being able to help them in the ways they need help, and that comes from getting to know them. Some people are afraid to hang out with homeless people. Some people are afraid to hang out with people who are formerly incarcerated. And I would say there's nothing to be afraid of. I mean, if you're in this work and you're setting out to be helpful to people, to help people be effectual in their own lives, that's in any of those groups. You should engage them and be involved, because there's a great many people who are not aware, who are not involved, and we need people who are very passionate about social justice to get in there and mix it up. And that doesn't mean that you have to join an organization. You can be a social justice pioneer in your own life, and that includes your family members. Some of my family members want to talk to me because I call them up and say, "Are you going to this? Or are you going to that? What are you doing with that? What's going on?" So it doesn't have to be a macro thing. It can be your neighbors, your friends, your family members, because these are the people that are really revolve around your essential circles. And if you can touch them, you can touch other people. I remember, and I'll stop after this, I remember Barack Obama giving a speech, and it seemed kind of elementary, but it just made so much sense. He said that, you're talking about firing up and trying to get people motivated. He said, if you can fire up a room, you can fire up a building. And if you can fire up a building, you can fire up a city. And if you can fire up a city, you can fire up a nation. And it goes on and on. So it doesn't take such a group. It takes one person. Mm-hmm. One. And history has proven this. One person to say, this is unacceptable. One.
I just wanted to add to what you said about OWS, if anybody's interested in this, because all you have to do is put in your zip code. Go to OWS online, put in your zip code, and they will tell you where the next training is going to be. Has anybody been to an OWS training?
You guys all know we mean
Occupy Wall Street. It's an amazing experience. I went to Middle Collegiate Church, and I live in Chelsea, and they sent me over here. And there was a wonderful, diverse group of people from all walks of life, all ethnicities, and they had us in groups, and we talked about why we were there and how we connected to it. They showed films about the history of civil disobedience and justice in this country. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., many historical figures, but real people who were in OWS, really, before we called it that. And after that, they told us we are now going to go to an unidentified, undisclosed destination because we know that here in this room there are police undercover. And so we're not going to tell you. If you want to come, get on the little school buses, and we're going to go to do a demonstration. And so we got on the buses, and we found that we were very close to where we were. We were at Bank of America across the street from Bryant Park. And we had been instructed if the police show up, which we expected them to show up, we were to say, police need more pay. So, I mean, this is, you might say this is a kinder, gentler OWS. But it was wonderful, and the focus, as you said, was on how you can go back to your community, whatever it is. Maybe your communities make the road, and you're working primarily with Hispanic immigrants to this country, and you want to advocate for them. Maybe your community is the homeless, maybe it's abused women, maybe there's a zillion different communities that you have a passion for. Maybe it's a community you work with and you're getting a paycheck for, or maybe it's the community that you have a passion for and you do it in your free time. And it might become your life focus. You don't know. But the other thing is, I got an email after that. It was an evaluation. How did I think the training went? What's my feedback? I'm telling you this, I was very impressed. I voted for Obama.
Mm-hmm.
I was terrified at that last...
Let's not you, that's a whole
But
other...
no, I wanted to say, I went for a job. I applied for a job in the Obama campaign, and it was billed as community organizing for Obama. It was not community organizing for Obama. It was sales, and that's different than community organizing. And that's why I think it's very important for us to safeguard and hold up the traditions, the long-standing traditions that relate to social work and community organizing. It's about people and their needs and how we can help facilitate them. It's about Make the Road a New Sanctuary Coalition changing the law in New York City so that Immigration Customs Enforcement agents can't go into Rikers and just round up any immigrants who have happen to be there. It's about changing the law. It's about running for office, like Ruth Messenger, social worker, who became the borough president of Manhattan. More of you, I hope every single one of you thinks about running for office.
Something to think about. Now, we've got about 10 minutes left, and so I was wondering, I want to open up the floor to questions. If anyone had a question, raise your hand or just talk. Okay, go ahead.
No question.
Speak loudly so we can pick you up recording. Yeah.
So I do a lot of work with corrections and probation. I work with the Department of Probation right now. And well, I'm actually juvenile operations and research and planning, so all boroughs.
Okay.
And I'm very interested in the macro field. I've also done a lot of direct practice, but in terms of pursuing a more macro-focused work, especially in research, like at the place that you're at, and did you also pursue licensing for clinical social work, and how does that kind of play in? Because that's
It's so interesting. I actually just submitted my supervisor just submitted my hours with my clinical license. But I don't know if I'm going to use it. Thank you. I'm going to take the test in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But the thing is, it doesn't affect that aspect. I mean, I would think that it makes you much more qualified and much more marketable as a social worker to have that. I mean, many of the, I don't know if you deal with individual clients.
not right now. I have.
Not, but you have.
I wanted all macro this time.
And many of the clients that you will see have systemic mental health issues that date back years and years, and you will need to deal with them in a very clinical way in order to get past all that stuff. So I think it would be absolutely helpful. One other thing, I was thinking about talking about the laws. I work in the court system, and so one of the things that really boggles my mind with many of the people that are convicted in the system for misdemeanors is that they strip them of their license, they strip them of their driver's license. which is so bizarre because most of these guys can get jobs driving, which would like enhance their ability to be able to make money. You know, it's so bizarre. It just works. It totally works backwards to me in many respects. But yeah, I would think that would be very important. In that you should, anytime you want to be able to get more qualifications, more credentials, it just only adds to your expertise in that particular field. It can only be helpful.
Can I add real quick too? Sure. So I have never worked towards my C. Actually, I am licensed. I have my LM. But I've never been in a position where I had hours that qualified or supervision that qualified. And for me, honestly, it hasn't mattered so much. I think having an LM was important just because of the way all the funky New York laws work to do any client work. But I definitely can also see how within my agency, I mean, I won't say that I've like topped out, but certainly there are certain doors that I think would be open where where if I had an LC, like there would be options that maybe there aren't quite so much. And
the thing is, I'm sorry. The thing is also that you may want to consult on the side. So I can work on the side as an LCSW because I have the qualification to make extra money or whatever I'm trying to go on vacation. But it allows you to consult on the side and bring and make extra money as whatever your needs are. But I was thank goodness I worked in St. Luke's as a child therapist for like 3 years. So I got my hours there and I got my hours here at Cases because we have a psychiatrist on staff and she runs supervision groups with us. So I was just very lucky to get the supervision hours and be able to apply for my LCSW.
I think there are a lot of agencies that you can look at if you want to do more macro work, like the Fund for Modern Courts. I was a coordinator for a program that trained people to go into the family courts and do a research study and then make recommendations to make changes in the courts. That's macro work. And another, for example, would be the Community Settlement House movement. There are a lot of opportunities throughout in New York City, particularly. I don't know how many there are, but there are quite a few. That's where you don't necessarily have to have that LCSW. It depends. I'm in a little different situation because my credentials were grandmothered in a
Grandfather.
I'm sorry, my grandfather.
We have something. We gotta have something.
And I think if you choose to work in agencies that are more social justice targeted, you're going to have the same situation. I'm in the same situation. I've never worked under another social worker aside from my very first job, and so I will never get my C because I've never had proper supervision. So there are places I can't go. Like there's a housing agency that I have worked for in the past, and in order to move above like 2 levels below me right now, I have to have my C. So I'm kind of tapped out there, and I like that place. I would love to work there, but I can't. And so I think you have to make a choice, kind of early on.
I also would like to add for everyone here, actually, don't accept any job just to have a job, because you will be thoroughly unhappy. The thing is, you look for jobs and look for jobs that speak to you and who you are, your interests, your passions, because you will be a much happier person and you will do much better work with the clientele that you have. So I would when I graduated from social work school, I kind of jumped on this first job that was offered to me and I hated it. It's follow your passions and be very discerning about jobs that you apply for and jobs that you want, because if you're going to be working there for maybe 3 years, you want to be able to love the job. You want to be able to come to the job and feel that thrust that you feel when you're doing something of note and you're helping people and you feel great about it. It's very important.
Is anybody here in NASW now? Do any of you have? See, I regret that I did not stay more connected to NASW. I was co-chair of the Peace and Justice Committee or Anti-Nuclear or something. But you didn't have to be a member to be on that committee. It was the only committee that was open to everybody, whether or not you belong to NASW. And of course, you have to pay to be a member, and it gets pricey. It looks that way sometimes, especially when you're hunting for jobs. But I think what I feel is that as a profession, we have gotten away from our core, which is social justice. It's not about putting out your shingle and being another psychotherapist to add to all the other psychotherapists from all the other disciplines. We have a very special orientation. When we look at our history, it's about helping people who live up above the day-to-day suffering that they're in and make a difference. It's about being a personal change agent. It's about being, some of these expressions I didn't make up, be the change you want to see in the world. It's about, sure, and where did Gandhi and Martin Luther King get it? From Massachusetts, from Henry David Thoreau, and his refusal to pay his taxes because he didn't use any services from the town, and he went to jail. That's our idea of civil disobedience, which is where the whole
We only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to see if we could get, if there were any other questions that we had time for. A few more. Anyone else? You look like you want to ask something.
Take a chance.
Take a chance.
When you're young, when you're starting out,
Yeah.
is the best time, in my opinion, to try to follow your bliss. Do something different. Take a chance to really explore the options. Don't just take the safe road all the time.
Yes.
Because later on in life, you'll have plenty of opportunity for the safe road. But when you're young, especially if you don't have kids and you don't have responsibilities, people that you have to pay for. It's I think really valuable to see how you fit into, or what makes you feel really impassioned, and you have to know who you are, and taking chances with different kinds of jobs I think is important.
Well, I want to then, sure there's no other questions? Okay. I wanted to go around, just ask you one at a time, and we'll think about it for a minute. If you can name or just say in a sentence one thing that you have learned from a client or something. Hello, Kitty. Something that you have learned from a client, something that was unexpected that you've learned from this work. If you can just say like a little quick thing about that. So we'll start with Kate.
Yeah, sure. Before I came back to grad school, actually, when I was running therapeutic group home, I had one client who, I don't remember what was going on with her, but she was very upset one day and we were talking. She was like a 15-year-old white girl, and I was, trying to empathize with her and sort of, just reflect my sense of caring for her. And I started to say, because she was talking like at length about things she was really upset about, I started to say, I understand. And halfway through, I looked at her and I was like, bit my tongue. And she looks at me, she has tears streaming down her face, and she was like, thank you so much for not saying you understand. Mm-hmm. And I think about that because that really informs the social justice work that I do with clients as well, where it's not about me understanding everything that somebody has been through. It's about me understanding systems and how they operate, and then hearing how that person is experiencing them and creating a space where they can share it, but to not pretend that I can understand when, I can't.
That's beautiful. Sarah, do you have something to say?
Yeah, so one thing, I guess it's hard. You've learned so many things. I'm thinking of a flood of sort of moments and things at times, and you learn things every single day. And I guess be creative and think about what something is extremely important. And often when I'm working with my clients, they are dealing with a lot of issues around access. So access to things where I have, privilege getting. And I think of one instance where I was talking to clients one day. We run a workshop, office operations, where we do IT training, we do Word, Excel certification, all this concrete stuff. And we were talking about history, we talked about museums. And, one of my immigrant clients said to me, I've never been to a museum in New York City. That's for rich people. And we thought, this is really interesting. This is something that was not at their access for some of our clients who are immigrants, who are poor, who don't want to spend the $20 to get into the Met. And we spoke to some people from our board, and we got tickets for everyone in the class to go to the Met. And then we invited a board member to come give a private tour of the Impressionist wing, and we all decided this was something that we were going to do, make sure all our clients got to go to this museum and get access to something that typically wasn't theirs. And I think we have all these sort of teaching moments, and you can do what you can do when someone tells you, oh,